Welcome to the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast. I'm Greg Drevenstedt, Editor-in-Chief at Rider Magazine. Our guest today is Hunter Leonard, whose one-of-a-kind Staratania motorcycle won Best in Show at our Bring It Bike show at the Americade Rally in June. Before we get started, we want to thank Firepower for sponsoring this episode. Firepower provides high-quality, affordable motorcycle products that are distributed in the United States exclusively by Western Power Sports. Firepower sells high-quality batteries, oil, OEM replacement parts, and accessories. Protect your motorcycle from the elements with one of Firepower's motorcycle covers. Choose from the top-of-the-line Elite Series cover, the more affordable Deluxe cover, or the Day cover, which conveniently fits in a saddlebag or trunk for use on the go. Find out more at firepowerparts.com or your nearest Western Power Sports dealer. So, Hunter, like I said, your bike, the Staratania, won Best in Show at the Bring It Bike show, which was the second year we did that at Americade. That rally takes place in Lake George, New York. It was the week after Memorial Day. The show runs for 3 days. We've got winners in multiple categories. Then we have an Editor's Choice Award that we give out each day. And then at the end of the show, we pick the Best in Show, which is basically the best bike entry of the entire show. And you were that winner, or your bike was that winner. So I remember when you brought it the very first day of the show, rolled it up, when the show got started, and really was kind of blown away because we'd never seen this bike before. So tell us a little bit about it. I mean, this is truly a unique one-off build. You built it from scratch, designed it. Give us a little bit of background on the Staratania.
Yeah, so the Staratania started as a project. It was not my first bike that I've built, but it was the first, I would say, full-sized real motorcycle that I was going to attempt to build after a couple motorized bicycle weird death trap inventions that I made later in high school and early in college. And the Staratania started its idea when I was on a study abroad trip in Germany, summer of 2019. And I went to as many motorcycle museums as I physically could. And in one of these museums in Berlin, Germany, was a 1928 Windhoff. And that was a very advanced, very ahead of its time inline four-cylinder motorcycle whose engine was so large that the front steering fork bracket bolted into the cam covers and the rear wheel was held on by like these stainless pipes coming out of the transmission casing. And it was shaft driven, front and rear suspension. It was mind blowing. And they didn't make very many, I think less than 100 or so, but one was in this museum and I fell in love with it. I loved the way it looked. I love its long wheelbase, fat tires, the essential look of the late 20s, early to mid 30s motorcycles. That was an era in motorcycling that I absolutely love. And I'm a little bummed that motorcycles don't look like that anymore. I was a mechanical engineer, or I was at that time studying to be one. And I was thinking, the future of transportation is electric vehicles, but I really don't like futurism. I don't really like how a majority of motorcycle companies, whether that's Zero or Harley Davidson, I'm not a fan of crotch rockets. I'm not a fan of sport bikes. I'm worried that motorcycles are slowly turning into what cars are now, where everything is just a curvy blob meant to blend in and not stand out. And I struggle to even tell the difference between, modern sport bikes or any new bike nowadays. Not that I really pay much attention to modern stuff, but I was noticing that everything was slowly starting to converge and look the same. And I thought, why not take this beautiful motorcycle and redesign it, build it from scratch with my own frame, my own electronics. It would be the hardest and most expensive and difficult project I've ever done, but at that point, I didn't have any job prospects. I didn't have any offers or any idea where I'd want to work or where I'd want to go. So it was kind of a combination of let's push the boundaries of what I am personally capable of, and start my next big project. Like I didn't have enough going on already, and it was also maybe I could start my own business. Maybe I could build these for people. Now, I wasn't looking to, be the next Tesla building hundreds of thousands of these things, but I did some rough math. If I could, build them for 10, sell them for 20 or something like that, then if I sold 10 or 20 a year and had one or two couple engineers help me build them in our little personal factory, we could get this idea off the ground. and we could all live happily building these bikes for people. There'd be levels of customization. You could do different colors and motors and, all crazy stuff when you're building motorcycles in very small quantities. And I wanted to build the next vehicle that looked like it was from the 1930s, but it had and had the feeling of the 1930s, but it had modern day reliability. I'm also a big advocate for the right to repair, so I didn't want any and nothing to be locked out of the consumer. No fancy computers or software was necessary to mess with this thing. No fancy, bolt heads or special tools required. Anyone with standard screwdrivers and spanners and wrenches can fix, work, and tinker with this bike. And that's how the whole idea started. And it was fall of 2019 where I was working with SolidWorks and designing this bike. I was actually using pictures from the side of the 1928 Windhoff as almost like a stencil, and then kind of matching my wheelbase to that. I'm assuming the inventors or the patent holders of the Windhoff are long gone, so I'm not
Right,
super
right,
worried
right.
about
Yeah.
copyright or anything. And no one's really heard of the Windhoff. So like a lot of people that I've shown pictures of the bike, they see the inspiration. So that's how the whole idea started back in 2019. Progress was pretty consistent all the way until summer of 21, where the bike ran for the first time under its own power. It had a bunch of tweaks that still need to be made. It was a hardtail at that point, and that's when I discovered that the Springer seat wasn't enough to save your back
Right.
from
Right.
some bumps in the road. And the motor was getting hot, and the batteries I had used the first time around didn't have the capacity I wanted. So I did some more upgrades over the winter of 21 to 22, and then the summer of 22 was the re-release or the V2
Okay.
of the
Sure.
Steratania, and I brought it to a bunch of more bike shows, rode it around a bunch, and that's the bike that exists now. I haven't touched or changed it much.
So, what's the inspiration for the name Staratania?
Steratania is a town in Pennsylvania off of I-90, and I drive I-90 east and west many times a year, and I always saw the exit sign with the town
Right.
name. And I thought, oh, that's very pretty sounding. How about I'll
Yeah.
change a couple letters and use that?
Right.
And I've got a couple other names for like other motorcycles I want to design and build in the future, but it just had a certain ring to it.
Well, I mean, like I said, when you pulled up to the show, got this long, low bike, spoked wheels, very traditional styling. You have these huge footboards that they're made of wood, aren't they? Or at least partially made
Yes.
of wood. So, very classic looking bike, but obviously when you look a little bit closer, there's something a little bit different about it. It doesn't have an exposed engine. What it's got is batteries. So take us through how you started this as was this a project when you were in engineering school? This was like a senior thesis, or was this just something you did as on the side, or how did it work out where you basically, because it takes a lot to build something from scratch and see it all the way through from concept to the finished product several years later. So, how did you get started with that?
The whole project started purely as a personal project, no outside influence from my school or anything. It was purely my idea and my own dollar that was going to fund this. And I had worked some paid internships while in college, so I had some income coming from there. A lot of the cost was actually funded by flipping lawnmowers. I do a lot of small engine repairs, and I actually would fix people's motorcycles for them. And that money coming into my little rental garage at the time was helping to pay for parts. A bunch of metal and stuff came out of my school's machine shop scrap bin, and I actually worked in my school's machine shop for a measly $14 an hour at the time. But during the graveyard shift in the machine shop, no one else would be there. So I'd be getting paid to go make and machine components of this bike on my own time. So that was a pretty sweet win-win. And this whole thing it started out as a personal project. It got the attention of RIT, the college I was going to, and they actually gave me some grant funding as well. They had their own internal program called the Dick Reeve Fund, and I ended up winning the grant 3 times in a row, 3 consecutive years, and it was $1,500 each time, and that helped pay for more tools, more
Right.
batteries, etc. So a lot of people saw my motivation, my project, and that,
Right.
and I did get some financial helping there, but I would say probably 80% of it was my own input.
So this is, I mean, I understand the inspiration is from a motorcycle from 1928. And if anybody's been to motorcycle museums, if you've seen motorcycles of that era, like I said, it's definitely got those lines and proportions. But this is that's the inspiration. But you used modern techniques, you used computer-assisted design software, so latest design software. But also, you don't really have many off-the-shelf parts. You built a lot of stuff from scratch. You've got a frame, you've got a lot of other things. So tell us a little bit about how you built and constructed some of these components.
Mhm. All right. When I bring this bike to bike shows, or at least just out in public, a lot of people assume or thought that I had repurposed another motorcycle frame, like an old Honda, or name a insert brand name here. And it's like, oh, did you use this? And no, none of those frames, no existing parts were going to be able to achieve the look I wanted. Or if it was a 1920s or 30s motorcycle to begin with, no one would want me hacking one of those apart to convert to electric.
Right.
Those shouldn't be messed with. So I knew that I had to make this whole frame myself. And at the time, I didn't have a tube bender. I wasn't terribly excited to make a frame out of tubes. And considering a lot of the components of the batteries were going to be blockish in nature, they're Nissan Leaf battery cells from salvaged Nissan Leafs, and a lot of the components are basically squares. I wanted a lot of sharp, hard edges to contrast modern designs where everything is a smooth curve now. And I found that the easiest way for me personally to build my own motorcycle frame was to actually make it as like a jigsaw, a 3D jigsaw puzzle out of CNC plasma cut plates. Langmuir Systems had just released a new, or brand new to the market, CNC plasma cutter that was actually affordable. And so I used my internship money as well as a plasma cutter and a gas powered air compressor to basically be cutting steel sheets, or two-dimensional steel sheets, out in my parents' garden shed out back, where my shop was temporarily for a couple months. And I would form basically a bunch of pieces that would nestle together. They would have these little cutouts and tabs that would lay into each other. They could be held together with some clamps. And I had a simple flux core MIG welder running off of a long extension cord from the garage, and I was welding it out in the backyard. And I wanted to keep the manufacturing process as simple as possible for two reasons. So one, I could actually make it myself. No
Right.
fancy castings, no fancy welding for fancy aluminum parts. I didn't want any difficult or complicated geometry or stamped pieces because I didn't own the tools. I didn't know anyone with the tools. Any stamped parts would require tools and dies, and I don't
Right.
have the money to make any of that. So a lot of the way that the bike was built was actually built around my own internal manufacturing abilities, which was very little. Yeah, I was just a college kid pinging around Massachusetts and Rochester, New York, and I didn't have a ton of space. I didn't have a dedicated shop at the time, so everything kind of fell into three categories. It was either plasma cut steel plates that would get welded together, or it would be a simple steel or aluminum block that would be machined on a manual Bridgeport in the school's machine shop by me, or the rest would be 3D printed. And 3D printers are easy to come by nowadays. It's not a rare or hard to access technology anymore. And 3D printing allows for almost like hands-off manufacturing. You design the part, you upload it to your printer. If all your settings are right, you'll get a part that you can actually use on the final product. And that would not only make manufacturing easier for a small guy like me, but anyone that were to buy this bike down the line, they could possibly own a 3D printer, and they could actually print replacement parts if I gave them the files. And so by making the bike easier to produce for me, it also makes the bike easier to repair for a future customer down the line. So a bunch of factors, but
So,
mostly cost.
yeah, so with the 3D printer, that you've got some 3D printed parts on the bike. So which components? It's the fender, the headlight cover nacelle. What are the pieces you've got that are 3D printed?
A lot. The front and rear fenders are fully 3D printed. The gas tank was also 3D printed. I'm using black PETG, polyether tetraglycol. It's the same plastic that they use in water bottles. And I'm conscious about climate change, and I don't like using plastics that never degrade. But the plus side to that is your fenders will never fade, they'll never rust. The PETG is an extremely durable plastic, so the fenders should, all these plastic components should outlast the life of the rest of the bike. And also they're easily replaceable as well, considering that they're 3D printed. The battery box covers a lot of the internal structure inside of that steel frame. There's a bunch of plates with heat certs for bolts and other threaded stuff to screw into these plastic parts. They hold a lot of the other electronic components, like the fuses, the contact, and a bunch of the wiring that is going on underneath all of those batteries. There's a lot going on underneath those square rectangular battery covers that you don't currently see. And 3D printing makes all that possible.
Well, so obviously, for a podcast like this, audio or even the video, we'll try and make sure that we add in some photos. You've at the Leonard Motorworks website, it's leonardmotorworks.com. You've got a lot of photographs of the build process. People can really get into some of the details visually and see what you've done. It's really quite impressive. And like I say, we'll include that. We've also got a web story that basically has all the winners from the 2024 Bring It Bike Show at Americade on ridermagazine.com. So if you want to see those, we'll have links in the show notes, but you can check that out. The cool thing is, like, this bike, again, that you had to build around, the batteries. That's a big component of any car or motorcycle that's electric powered. Just as a little sidebar, it was very interesting that also the first day of the Bring It Bike Show, there was a gentleman named Tom Fisher from Illinois who showed up with a 1967 Harley Davidson Sprint, which is essentially an Aermacchi, small Italian motorcycle that had been badged Harley Davidson. He used to race it in the 350 class in Arma when it was, had its traditional ICE, internal combustion engine. But then he just decided to convert it to electric. So that was also in the show. Was you built your bike from scratch, but his was one you were talking about, well, there wasn't really an existing frame or anything. You really wanted this to be a fully built and designed vehicle, but he basically figured out, well, let's take out the engine and put in the batteries. And under what would be the gas tank, he pulled the gas tank off and had all the electrical connectors. So that was also one of those bikes that people would stop by. It had the original kind of patina of the tank, and people would stop by. They're like, hey, look at that. Oh, wait a second, something's different. So I know for the Steratania, again, people would walk by and just as they're just doing a head glance, they think, oh, look at that old school bike. What is that? And then they get closer and then they realize that it's because you've got the big battery packs, which are, where a traditional engine would be, but the motor is in the rear hub. The hub is in the rear wheel hub.
Yeah, it's a rear hub motor. That specific one is from Enertrack, and they're a company in Long Island, New York, that make these motors. It's a 40 horsepower electric motor, and it's about the most efficient way you can get power to the ground. There's no gears, belts, there's no oil to change or anything. It's simply some magnets and bearings and some pieces of metal to hold it and hold those things in place. And hub motors are extremely efficient. Honestly, the best way to power an electric motorcycle that's not performance oriented, because that gives you more space on the frame for batteries and other components. And especially like that racing Harley converted bike, when you have an inboard electric motor that can eat into your frame space for more batteries, longer range and stuff. So by using the hub motor allows for more space.
So when you say it's hub motor, did you have to then have a wheel built around it, that lace the hub and wheel and everything like that? Or how did it work? You get this off the shelf motor. How did you get it to work for your bike?
Yeah, the engineers at Enertrack, they offer lacing options or even cast rim options. I'm not exactly sure how much business they actually do anymore, so might have to find another supplier or even look maybe even look internal to building my own hub motors going forwards. But the hub motor showed up spoked to a Warp 9 racing rim of my specification. I love the black rims with the chrome spokes, and that was all at my request. And I had the really nice guys over at Warp 9 Racing lace me a front wheel that actually matches the rear. So it uses the same rims, same tires, front and rear.
So you mentioned that this rear hub motor is good for 40 horsepower. Give us some of the other specs, like wheelbase and overall weight and speed and so forth.
Yeah, the wheelbase, I don't actually I don't actually remember the number off the top of my head. If I go to leonardmotorworks.com, I have all the specifications there. It's a 63-inch wheelbase and it's almost 30 inches wide. The fastest I've ever gone with it is just over 90 miles an hour, and that wasn't because the bike stopped accelerating. That was because I no longer had the guts to give it any more throttle. But when you do all your own welding on your own frame and stuff, and you don't have any way to test its strength other than break it, you get. I don't have the balls of steel necessary to
Right,
hold it wide open throttle the whole time. So the fastest I've ever gone was like just over 90 miles an hour. I won't say where or when that was
right.
for legal reasons. And the bike weighs about 450 pounds. That surprises some people. They expect it to weigh more. But the inside of the bike is actually kind of hollow. The batteries sit on the outside and the electronics on the inside, all that doesn't weigh a huge amount.
So how much of you say you've got Nissan Leaf batteries, how much of the overall weight is just the batteries themselves?
Right now, there are 8 Gen 5 Nissan Leaf cells, and if I remember correctly, I think their combined weight was about 200-ish pounds.
Okay,
So the batteries make up a significant portion of the weight. Unfortunately, with the energy density of batteries nowadays, batteries are going to weigh a lot, and you need a lot of batteries to have a comparable range to internal combustion powered motorcycles. So until that technology advances, hopefully quickly and soon, large battery packs are going to be required for any electric vehicle.
well, I mean, that's, I guess, one of the challenges with motorcycles is they're smaller vehicles. They've got to have everything packaged in a much more, smaller space than automobiles. I mean, you can have cars and trucks and have the whole, the skateboard chassis, the whole floorboard is basically batteries, and you can distribute that weight and carry a lot more battery power and have more range. So, what is the average range for your bike and recharge and all that stuff?
Right now, the average range, depending on the speed you're riding and elevation changes and
Sure.
et cetera, is about 100 miles. It's going to be a little bit less if you're doing all highway riding at high speeds, and it's going to be a little bit more if you're riding slow, through suburban neighborhoods and you're using regenerative braking all the time. So it depends on a lot of factors, but it uses the same J1772 charging port that a majority of electric cars and motorcycles use, except Teslas. So you can charge this bike at any level 1 or level 2 charging station. Level 3 fast DC charging is currently not on the table just due to the massive amount of like electronics and circuitry, and the standard for level 3 DC charging and the communication protocols to make that work is a little over my pay scale right now. And I don't even know if I can have the space on the bike to make that work. Hopefully, if I can hopefully someday find a really generous, angel investor, or get a couple friends together and we pool our money, we could probably figure it out. But right now, it's
Right.
just level 1, level 2 charging.
Right.
Level 1 charging will get you from like zero, or get you to like 20 to 80% charge in about 6 hours, 7 hours. And level 2 charging, that goes down to about 2.5 hours.
So, give us a little bit about your background. I mean, you're in your mid-20s. You've graduated from engineering school. You work full time as an engineer. You're based in Crown Point, New York, which is about an hour north of Lake George. So you're in the Adirondacks essentially. You're very close to Vermont, and you work in Vermont full time.
Yeah, so I'm 25. I graduated from Rochester Institute of Technology. What is it? 2 years ago? Holy crap! Time flies. And I've been living up here in Crown Point. I started working temporarily at the paper mill down the street in Ticonderoga. And then while riding the Steratania at MX Rewind, a vintage motocross event, I was using it as a pit vehicle, not on the track.
Right, right.
Riding it as a pit vehicle the summer of 22, soon after I graduated. It was actually the weekend before starting my full-time position at the paper mill as a reliability engineer. I ran into an engineer from Beta Technologies, and he loved the bike, and he loved it so much that I got his contact info. We did some chatting, some talking, and about 2 months later, some engineers from Beta Technologies flew down to my shop here in Crown Point, New York. I gave them a quick tour. We chatted for a couple hours, and I then had a job offer as a
Oh, great.
mechanical engineer at Beta Technologies, and they're located out of Burlington, Vermont.
So what does
They're
Beta Technologies do?
Yeah, they build. We are currently working on the next generation of electric aircraft.
Wow.
We have two models that we are currently working through FAA type certification. We're working closely with government agencies. We have a couple different offices and buildings in Burlington, Ohio, North Carolina, Canada, and we have some functioning prototypes. And we have a giant factory that we're currently outfitting with tools and people and resources in Burlington, Vermont. And I'm currently a tooling engineer where I design and make machines and robots and fixtures that help our technicians and our assemblers help build
Wow.
the electric aircraft that we plan on selling as soon as the end of this year.
Excellent. So how did you get into motorcycles? I mean, like I said, when I was in college, I was like going to parties. I wasn't designing motorcycles. I mean, I was, anyway, I just, it was a different deal. But I mean, obviously you've got a real passion for motorcycles. You've got a passion for design. I know you've also got some vintage motorcycles. So kind of how did you get into riding and working on bikes and all of this?
I think I have a relatively standard story for a lot of motorcycle riders, especially for young teenage guys like I was, where their mom or my mom was like, no motorcycles, period. And my dad just said, listen to your mother. And the only opportunity I had to ride any bikes of any kind was we had some extended family who lived down in North Carolina. We'd visit every summer for a week, and they had some old Suzuki and Yamaha Enduros from the like 1970, 1971. And there was a Suzuki TC90, a TS250, and a Yamaha DT1 and a JT60, if I remember correctly. And that little JT60, that little tiny single cylinder two stroke mini Enduro Yamaha was the very first motorcycle I ever got to ride. And the thing was, pretty crusty. The thing was 40 years old when I was first learning how to ride it. And no one else in my family really cared about them. So then I grew up going down there every summer, and that was my only exposure to motorcycles. My great uncle would teach me how to clean carburetors. He was an airplane mechanic, and I was basically the one cousin that would keep the bikes running for me and my other cousins to go ride up and down the cornfields down there. And it wasn't until end of high school that I brought home a broken, clapped out motorized bicycle. You know those like Chinese engine
Sure.
kits that you
Yeah.
can bolt into a bicycle
Yeah.
frame? That was my first ever quote unquote motorcycle. And my mom was not happy. And she said, the only way I'm going to let you ride that is if you buy get an actual motorcycle helmet, wear boots and knee and elbow pads, and you go to the DMV and you get it registered as a
Right.
motorized bicycle. So I did all that. I took the paperwork to the Massachusetts DMV, and the woman behind the poor woman behind the counter had no idea what a motorized bicycle was because no one ever, who the hell goes and registers those things?
Right. Right.
So I got the paperwork and the sticker. I put hundreds of miles on that bike. I went through multiple rear tires, and at this time I had no tools. I had a corded drill and a jigsaw, and that was about it for tools. And so I modified and rat rotted this motorized bicycle to the point where it was no longer reliable and kept breaking down on me. And that's when college started. And I learned how to use SolidWorks for CAD or computer aided design. And that's when I started designing, more complex custom frames and bicycles. But it was always a motorized bicycle, or it was something that resembled, a
Right.
lightweight vehicle with a small engine, never a full size bike. It was my second year in college. I was still living in dorms, so I didn't have a garage or any place to store a motorcycle, but there were the bicycle racks behind the dorm buildings. So my very first motorcycle, just on a whim, was a 1980 Suzuki GS250. And it was this cute little nice maroon red street cruiser. And it cost me $1 per cc. It was a $250 bike that
Nice.
needed a carb clean and a battery, and it ran. that was my first ever motorcycle. At that point, my mom couldn't stop me anymore. She understood it was too late. She just told me to be safe. And I
Right.
had it parked in the bicycle racks out back behind the dorm buildings with a tarp over it. And
Right.
that was my very first bike.
So, I mean, it sounds like, you got started riding some dirt bikes. You had to learn how to work on them to get them running so you could enjoy them. And then you've had, sounds like you learned a lot about working on your motorized bicycle, even if rat rotted it to the point it wouldn't run. But when you came to Americade, you had a vintage Suzuki 250. I don't know what year it was, what model it was. Or did you have a couple of bikes? But so you've got several vintage Japanese motorcycles, right?
Yeah, the addiction has reached the point of, well, okay, depending on your definition and what you consider a motorcycle, I could have anywhere from 26 to 30 motorcycles in my garage right now.
Wow.
Uh, some are in bins, completely taken apart, waiting to be restored. Some are in the middle of being restored. Some, like my old motorized bicycle inventions from high school, they're currently sitting up on a shelf as art pieces right now, probably never to be ridden again. I don't know if you'd consider that a bike, but that first Suzuki GS 250 started my addiction. That from there, the next bike was a 1980 TS 100, and then after that, I went to Vintage Motorcycle Days in Ohio for the first time
Yeah.
that summer.
Great event.
Of
Yeah.
summer of 2018, no, summer of 2019, right before starting the Sterratania, and that's when I bought my third bike. That was a 1974 Suzuki GT 250, a little cute two-stroke twin. And at that point, I was like, well, okay, I have brand loyalty now to Suzuki. I grew up riding old Suzukis, and
Right.
I always loved the look. I've always loved the character that these old Japanese bikes had. I loved the stories that they told. And so I don't really care too much about having the newest, the shiniest, the fastest bikes, but I do love the sound and smell of an old two stroke. Unfortunately, you don't see or hear them very often anymore. And so it always brings a smile to my face when going down the street on one of my old Suzuki two stroke street bikes or dirt bikes. And I just love the looks I get from people. For a lot of older folks around Crown Point, a lot of people, it reminds them of their childhood or
Sure.
reminds them of an earlier time when they used to ride these bikes. I think I think there's a lot of I think there's a lot of good things that come from saving old vehicles. The same way that anyone would rescue and restore an old car, I think old motorcycles get overlooked sometimes. And they played a huge part in American history, especially in the late 60s and 70s, the motorcycle boom, um, where they were everywhere. And I didn't grow up or live in those times, but I've seen plenty of magazine articles and watched the movies and other culture from those days. And I just love the way these bikes look and sound, and especially the way they smell.
Yeah.
Can't get enough of those of the two-stroke exhaust. And so it's turned into this passion of mine to keep these old vehicles on the road, whether they're restored and pristine museum quality, or they still have their rust and patina and original paint from when they came out of the factory.
Right.
If I had more money, I would buy 100-year-old Harley Davidsons and Indians and Hendersons
Right.
uh, and I would love to restore and collect and ride all motorcycles of all ages, but just mostly due to my small budget and all my other things going on, keeping my budget low, I mainly do old Japanese bikes right
Right.
now.
Right.
But I love
Well,
all old motorcycles.
it's interesting that you've designed some projects in college, and one of your first, motorcycles, motorized bicycle. Of course, that's what some of the earliest motorcycles were essentially, motorized bicycles. And, you talk about the inspiration for the Sterratania as a motorcycle built in 1928 by a small manufacturer. I mean, in Europe as well as in the United States and before World War II, maybe before, there were like 300 motorcycle
Yeah.
manufacturers at some point. I mean, there were just, tons of them. And obviously there was, some attrition. Not all of them can survive, but some of them had some very innovative things that they did that then were adopted by other manufacturers and designers. So I imagine for somebody like you, who is a designer and an engineer, that working on and getting to know some of these older vehicles provides some inspiration. Also, that's how all that engineering knowledge gets moved forward. So yeah, that's great. Well, like I said, for somebody like yourself, I mean, I'd say that you've got more bikes than you've got years that you've been alive. So yeah, I would count that as an addiction at this point, but it sounds like a pretty healthy one. So that's great. Well, hey,
Thank you.
Hunter, I mean, it was real pleasure to meet you at Americade. I really appreciate you bringing your motorcycle to the show and sharing it with folks. It was very
I
impressive.
appreciate
I
I
know that,
appreciate the
Bill
opportunity.
Dutcher, who, is the founder of Americade. I know you talked to him. We had that industry party that night. And, he's a former racer, former PR guy for Harley Davidson. And I know he was also thoroughly impressed with your motorcycle and talking to you. So yeah, I would imagine we're going to see a lot more from you and Leonard Motor Works in the future. So again, thanks for coming on the show. It was great chatting with you.
And thank you for the opportunity. It's been great.
Awesome. Awesome. For the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, I'm Greg Drevinstead. Again, want to thank Firepower for sponsoring this episode. Thanks for listening, and keep the rubber side down.
If you've enjoyed listening to the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, please subscribe, leave us a positive rating, and tell your friends. We also encourage you to visit ridermagazine.com, where you can get the latest in motorcycle news and reviews and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. You can also subscribe to print and digital editions of Rider Magazine, which is published 12 times a year. Thanks again for listening.